I love painting street scenes, and I have a fun one to show you today. I'm going to show you how I paint this rainy street scene with these vibrant headlights. Let's take a look. After laying in my drawing, I dampen the front and the back of the paper, and I'm ready to go. So I'm painting the scene from light to dark, and I really want to keep in mind the headlights on this car. It's one of the main parts of the scene. It's one of the reasons that I took the picture. So the first thing I'm doing is laying in this gray, rainy sky. And for that, I'm using Cobalt Blue, a little bit of Cerulean, some Lavender, and bringing it down to the edge of the buildings. And then I'll think about the light color on the building. So I'm dropping in some of the distant color while the paper is still damp. I want that soft edge there, and working my way into the scene. On a gray day like this, there's not a lot of color in the scene, but we can still follow our rules for creating depth. That's using cooler colors in the background, using a little warmer colors as we get into the middle ground and the foreground, and that's what I'm doing here. I did drop in a little vibrant yellow for this sign that I'm going to paint around later. That is some cadmium yellow with a little bit of raw sienna. This area here is a lot of raw sienna with a little bit of neutral tint. And areas that are a little cooler, I'm using a little bit of cobalt blue to cool those areas down. Now I'm thinking about where the light is, trying to paint from a wet edge, and now I'm working into the value on the road and trying to remember to paint around the reflections of the headlights as I work my way through this. So I'm using a little bit of cadmium yellow for that reflection, and then on the edges I'm using some burnt sienna, and I'm letting them softly merge with the color for the road that I'm using. As you're doing this, you might need to lift out the area of light. You just do your best with it. This is tricky. It's hard to get to the right value, but also preserve things when you're painting wet into wet. You just do the best you can, and you'll see here I have to lift off a little bit of the light. I'm using a size 12 Escoda Perla brush here and pulling that down. And I think that burnt sienna transition between the really bright areas and the coolness on the road is a nice touch. So bringing that down, covering up the entire paper, adding a little bit more strength while things are wet. When you're doing your first wash, you've covered everything. You can still go back in and add some colors where you need some colors. I wanted to add a little bit more red onto this car. I'm using some burnt sienna for that with a little bit of rose madder permanent and adding little bits of color around the scene. Now, because everything is so wet, I can use my brush and I can lift off a little directional line to lead us into the scene, and that's part of how we're building up the strength in the scene and creating that feeling of a wet road. That is a look at the first wash. At this point, I let everything dry, and then I come back and get into the middle values. So I'm starting over here on the left. We have some trees. It's an overcast day. I'm not using a lot of vibrant green for the trees. Cooling things down, using more cobalt blue in my mixture to create that gray look on this gray day. And I'm connecting this right into the value of the building, bringing this down, finding connectivity as much as I can find it. Now painting up into the tower, and there's a clock on this tower here, and you'll notice here I just kind of suggested it and then kind of softened it. I'm trying to keep things as loose and abstract as I can, creating an overall impression of the scene. Sometimes having things just too perfect just doesn't look good to me. It doesn't excite me about painting. So I like to create an impression. Now I'm bringing the trees all the way across the scene as they fade into the background, and then connecting the distant building into that, down into these other buildings. There are going to be little highlights that I want to preserve. That's why I switched to using this Escoda size 12 brush versus my medium round brush, so I can get in there and be a little more careful with my wash. Think about the mark that you're trying to make, what you are trying to accomplish, and that will dictate what brush it is that you're using. Where I can, I try to connect the cars, the value on the cars, into this wash. So whenever I find an opportunity to do that, I paint from a wet edge and find that connection. There's a lighter color truck that I painted around, and tying in some other cars that are closer up into that wash. The shadows help ground that car, even though it's a A cloudy, rainy day, I still want a little bit of shadow underneath the vehicles to ground them. Now I'm up to my main truck and I'm painting the windshield, carefully painting around the light area of the truck because I do want it to be a pretty light color in the end, a light value. Adding in those little bit of details, the darks of the tires, bringing them down. And now I need to think about how that is working with the reflection. So you'll see I'm tying this into what's next to it, always looking for connections where I can. Now I'm bringing in some more value around the road, some of the reflections that are on the road that will really define the light on the scene. And I decided that I needed another wash over most of the road. So I'm using my middle value, or I'm using my middle-sized brush, dragging that over. And again, that gives me another opportunity to paint around the light source here, the reflections on the ground. If I don't have a strong enough value there, the light will not shine like I want it to. So that led me to paint this value here to increase it in strength and really help that light stand out. So I'm working my way through, connecting, pulling that down, connecting this into the car shape. And this is a nice way to bring out this car a little bit more, create those separations between those different vehicles. But so far things are looking pretty good. The middle values really add a lot into the scene, and these little bits of darks that I'm getting into are starting to help the light really become apparent. One feature on a car that really helps it feel like a car are these side mirrors. So once I get those on, this truck is starting to come together. It's starting to look like I want it to. And I'm constantly trying to look at the whole painting. You know, this is something I talk to students about a lot. When we zoom in and we get too consumed with one area, we tend to overwork it. And I want to know how everything is relating to each other in the scene. So don't try to not hyper focus on, one specific area too much. You want to really think about how every part of the scene is relating to each other. So I'm getting in some darks and details underneath that car. And because it is a wet day and it's on the edge of the painting, I'm softening the bottom of that wheel so it's not just a real hard edge. Now, this is a great start. I know that I need some more details on the building. I know there's a tree over here that's going to really help that area feel closer to us. So I need to get in those final little bits of detail. So I'm mixing up some raw sienna, some cobalt turquoise with some neutral tint, a dark, strong green color, and adding a little bit of that green helps pull this area forward. See, there's more vibrancy, more saturation here closer up to us. Further back, the values are lower, there's less contrast and less saturation. Those are little things, but pay attention to those little things because it does make a difference. And now I just couldn't resist. I had to get out my X-Acto knife, and there was a wire going across. It was kind of catching the light. So I wanted to create that now with my X-Acto knife, just scraping in on top of that. Now back to the tower, we needed a few more little details and finishing touches to wrap that up. And I'm working on the face of that with where that clock is, some more details on the building. And I mention this a lot, but always step back, keep looking at your entire painting, seeing how things are relating to each other. The worst thing that you can do is just add in more details because you feel like painting them. Or you look at the reference and you think, well, it looks like this on the reference. Let me go ahead and add that in. So looking at it and deciding, is that good for the painting? Or is it just something that I feel like adding? Putting in a few more details on the cars to help finish up that part of the scene. Messing a little bit more with that tower. Some of the background buildings needing some windows and things like that. And finally, I want to pay more attention to the headlights. So the final thing I'm doing is using a little bit of gouache, and I add some of that on the headlights to create that sparkle. Well, after all that, here is a look at the final painting. And this was a really fun scene to paint, and I hope you enjoyed watching my process. If you have questions about my approach and you want to learn more, I have a free guide that helps you in the planning of your painting. If you feel like you need a bit more guidance or would like to know more about my technique, take a look at this. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone. You could print it out. You can download this right now before you start your next painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.